0 hours, 0 minutes, and 1 second. You've seen it. Everyone who has followed this case has seen it. The photograph of Nancy Guthrie's front porch, the blood on the pale tiles, the drops, the trail, the silence of a Sunday morning in Tucson, Arizona, captured in a single image that has haunted this investigation for 53 days. And if you're like most people, the first time you saw that photograph, you felt something in your chest. A tightening, a dread, because you knew at some level what you were looking at, even if you couldn't name it. But feeling it and reading it are two completely different things. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 45 seconds. This video is not about the feeling. This video is about the reading. Because blood, as it turns out, is one of the most precise communicators in all of forensic science. Every single drop that landed on that porch was obeying the laws of physics. And the laws of physics don't lie. They don't forget. They don't get confused under pressure. They don't change their story between interviews. Blood falls. It hits a surface. And in the shape it leaves behind, it records permanently, measurably, scientifically, exactly what was happening to the body it came from at the exact moment it fell. What we're going to do in this video is learn to read that record. All of it. Because this week, for the first time, enough has been confirmed publicly that we can finally put the full picture together. 0 hours, 1 minute, and 38 seconds. Before we go any further, a word about sourcing. Everything you are about to hear comes from named, credentialed experts, speaking publicly and on the record. A forensic pathologist, a certified bloodstain pattern analyst with nearly 2 decades of crime scene experience, retired FBI supervisory special agents, and one of the most closely sourced journalists currently covering this case. No one in this video is accusing any individual of any crime. These are analytical conclusions drawn from publicly available photographs and publicly confirmed crime scene information. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, please contact the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Now, let's talk about what blood can actually tell you. 0 hours, 2 minutes, and 30 seconds. Part 1. The Science of Falling Blood. Bloodstain pattern analysis has existed as a formal forensic discipline for over a century. And at its foundation is a principle so simple, so physical, so reliable, that it has held up through every advancement in forensic science since. The physics of falling liquid are consistent and predictable. A drop of blood, regardless of whose body it came from, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of what anyone involved wants the evidence to say, behaves the same way every single time it falls. The shape it leaves behind tells investigators how fast it was traveling when it struck the surface, whether the source was moving or stationary, from what approximate height it fell, and critically, what kind of wound produced it. 0 hours, 3 minutes, and 18 seconds. That last point is the one most people don't realize is even possible. You can look at a blood drop and identify what kind of injury produced it. An arterial bleed, where blood is being pumped out under pressure by the heart itself, produces a completely different pattern from a drip originating at a simple cut. A scalp wound produces different staining characteristics than a nosebleed. Blood that has been aerosolized, mixed with air from a breath, a cough, a compromised airway, leaves a shape that is chemically and visually distinct from a dense, pure drop falling straight from a wound. These are not subtle differences visible only under laboratory conditions. To a trained eye examining even a photograph, these distinctions are legible. And in Nancy Guthrie's case, the specific type of drop found on that porch is not consistent with just any kind of injury. It is consistent with very specific ones. And the moment you understand which type, the entire picture of what happened that night changes. 0 hours, 4 minutes, and 22 seconds. Part 2. Drive. Michael Baden and the Donut. In mid-February, less than 2 weeks after Nancy's disappearance, Fox News Digital published an interview with Dr. Michael Baden. If you don't know that name, here is what you need to know. Dr. Baden is one of the most decorated forensic pathologists in American history. Former Chief Medical Examiner of New York City. A man who has examined physical evidence in some of the most significant and consequential criminal cases of the last half-century. His credentials are not in question. His methodology is not in question. His ability to read forensic photographs is among the most established in his field. Dr. Baden had been studying the publicly available photographs of the blood on Nancy's porch, and what he found, specifically in the shape of the individual drops, was something that the majority of people following this case had completely overlooked. 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 14 seconds. The drops weren't just bloody. They were a specific kind of bloody. Dr. Baden told Fox News Digital precisely what he observed. The drops showed what he described as little pale centers, donut shapes. And those donut shapes, he explained, are typical for drops that come from the nose or mouth because they are mixed with air. Read that again slowly. Mixed with air. 0 hours, 5 minutes, and 48 seconds. Here's what that means in physical terms. When blood originates from a cut on the skin, a gash, a laceration, a wound to the hand or the arm, it falls as a relatively pure, dense liquid. Heavy, cohesive. When that kind of drop strikes a hard surface, it spreads from center to edge in a solid, consistent pattern. The center is dark and saturated. The edges may show minor spatter from the impact, but the core of the stain is full. Now contrast that with blood from the nose or the mouth. When blood comes from those locations, from the airways, from the respiratory system, something fundamentally different happens during its formation. The blood doesn't fall as a pure liquid. It gets mixed with breath, mixed with oxygen, mixed with the mechanical pressure of the respiratory system doing what it does, moment by moment, just to keep a person alive. When an air-mixed drop forms and falls, and it strikes a surface, the air that has been incorporated into the drop doesn't just vanish. It's still there, and it expresses itself in the impact. The air escapes outward from the center, and what it leaves behind is a hollow. A ring, a pale center, a donut. 0 hours, 6 minutes, and 59 seconds. Dr. Baden looked at the blood on Nancy Guthrie's front porch, and he saw those donuts. His conclusion: she was coughing up blood or bleeding from the nose. Now, here is why that specific finding matters so much, and why it matters for an 84-year-old woman in particular. An 84-year-old woman does not spontaneously begin coughing up blood at 2 in the morning on her own front porch. That is not a thing that happens without a cause. The human body produces blood at the nose or the mouth in response to specific, violent triggers. A strike to the face, blunt force trauma, a blow that connects with the nose, the cheekbone, the orbital socket, the jaw. The body also produces blood at the nose or mouth when a person's breathing is being forcibly compromised. When they are being held, restrained, pressed against a body or a surface in a way that builds pressure on the airway, pressure that causes blood to rise. 0 hours, 7 minutes, and 55 seconds. Dr. Baden did not stop at identifying the type of blood. He made the investigative implication completely explicit. He described these drops as, quote, not innocent droplets. From their shape, their number, and their location on the porch, they are, in his words, entirely consistent and indicative of occurring during an abduction. And then he added a detail that is almost unbearable to sit with. The blood droplets, he said, signify that Nancy Guthrie was either unable or did not attempt to stop the bleeding as she moved from the front of her house toward the driveway. Unable, or did not attempt. 0 hours, 8 minutes, and 42 seconds. Those are two different scenarios. But both of them tell you the same thing about Nancy's condition in that moment. If she was unable to stop the bleeding, her hands were not free. Something was preventing her from reaching up to her own face, which is the instinctive, automatic, universal human response to bleeding from the nose or mouth. We all do it. We reach up, we cover it, we press. If Nancy did not do that, or could not do that, her hands were restrained. She was physically prevented from responding to her own body's signals. If she did not attempt to stop the bleeding, she was unconscious, or so deeply compromised, so far from a state of normal waking consciousness, that she had no capacity to respond at all. No reflex, no instinct, no self-preservation motion. In either case, she was not walking freely on that porch. She was not in control of her own movement, and whatever caused the bleeding from her nose or her mouth had already happened before that blood landed on those tiles. 0 hours, 9 minutes, and 42 seconds. A note on Dr. Baden's limitations and what they reveal. Dr. Michael Baden is not an investigator on this case. He is not part of the FBI team. He has not had access to the actual physical evidence, only to the publicly available photographs. That is a limitation. There is information he does not have that the FBI does. But it is also a revelation, because if a forensic pathologist of his caliber can look at a photograph, the same photograph that every person following this case has been looking at, and identify aerated blood drops, identify their source, and draw analytical conclusions about the state of the person bleeding and the manner of her departure from that home, then the FBI laboratory, working with the actual physical evidence since day one, has been sitting with this information since February 4th. The blood was always talking. We just didn't have the translation. 0 hours, 10 minutes, and 35 seconds. Part 3. She was alive when she left. There is one other critical implication buried inside Dr. Band's analysis, and it changes the fundamental orientation of this investigation. Retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Jim Clemente, appearing on Brian Antoine Investigates on News Nation, looked at the blood drop pattern and stated something clearly and without hesitation. He said she was probably alive when she left the house. Clemente explained his reasoning. If you saw a dragging pattern, smear stains on the floor, contact stains that indicate a body being pulled horizontally across a surface, that would tell a different story entirely. But that's not what the photographs show. What the photographs show are drip stains, drops falling from a height, hitting the ground in a pattern consistent with forward movement, with someone or something carrying someone moving toward the driveway. Drops falling from a height while in motion. That is not the blood pattern of someone who was killed inside the house. That is the blood pattern of someone who is alive. 0 hours, 11 minutes, and 40 seconds. Think about what that means for the people working this case. It means the primary objective, locating Nancy, finding Nancy, bringing Nancy home, was still achievable as of the moment that blood landed on those porch tiles. She was breathing. She was bleeding from her nose or her face. She was in distress. She had been struck or compromised in some way that produced aerated blood from her airway. But she was alive. The drops say she was alive. And if she was alive when she left, then this case, 53 days in, is still a rescue investigation, not a recovery. That distinction matters. It matters to investigators. It matters to her family. And it should matter to every person watching this. 0 hours, 12 minutes, and 32 seconds. Part 4. The blood inside the house. For weeks, the forensic conversation about the blood on Nancy Guthrie's porch has focused almost entirely on what was outside. The porch, the driveway, the trail from the front entrance toward where her car was parked. But on March 25th, just yesterday, as of this recording, journalist Ashley Banfield, host of the Drop Dead Serious podcast and one of the most closely sourced reporters on this case, revealed something that has been sitting in this investigation since day 3. There was blood found inside the home. 0 hours, 13 minutes, and 9 seconds. Let that land for a moment. Banfield did not hedge this. She had 2 independent sources. Her first source told her on day 3 of the investigation, February 4th, 2024, that blood had been found inside Nancy's home. Her second source subsequently confirmed it. Definitely blood inside the home. And then that second source went further. The deputies who initially responded to the scene, who arrived thinking they were looking for a missing elderly woman, perhaps someone who had wandered, an 84-year-old who hadn't shown up for her church event. Those deputies observed evidence inside that house that stopped them. Evidence that told them, this is not what we thought this was. Evidence that required them to call in a more skilled and more experienced team, homicide investigators. 0 hours, 14 minutes, and 5 seconds. Homicide investigators were called to the scene of what was initially filed as a missing persons case. Because of what was discovered inside that house, Banfield spent weeks knowing there was blood inside the home, but unable to confirm exactly where it was. And then, most recently, she received the answer from a source who spoke on the record for the first time. The blood inside the home was found just past the front door, and its pattern, the shape of the drops, the characteristics of how they fell, matched the drops discovered on the outside. Banfield described the trail this way: over the threshold and out the front door, from inside the house, through the doorway, and out onto the porch. 0 hours, 14 minutes and 58 seconds. That is not a drop that happened outside. That is a blood trail with a direction. A sequence. A story. The violence, whatever caused that blood, began inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Before she reached the front door. Before she was on the porch. Before she was at the driveway. It started inside. And it left a trail all the way out. 0 hours, 15 minutes, and 30 seconds. Here is why directionality matters so profoundly to investigators. A blood trail with 2 confirmed endpoints, one inside the home, one on the external porch, is essentially a narrative told in physics. It tells you the sequence of events more reliably than any eyewitness account could. More reliably than any statement taken under pressure, any story recounted from memory, any testimony shaped by the passage of time or the presence of fear. Blood doesn't lie about the order in which things happened. Physics doesn't reverse. The trail says, inside first, then outside, then gone. Investigators now have a confirmed sequence, an interior origin point, an exterior continuation, and a terminus, the driveway, where the blood trail ends and Nancy Guthrie disappears. 0 hours, 16 minutes, and 18 seconds. Part 5, Amy Santoro and the Height of Falling Blood. On March 17th, forensic scientist Amy Santoro appeared on the Megyn Kelly Show on SiriusXM. Santoro has 18 years of experience as both a crime scene investigator and a forensic laboratory analyst. She is a certified blood stain pattern analyst. She has worked these cases from the ground up, not just from photographs but from physical crime scenes, evidence collection, laboratory analysis. She examined the publicly available photographs and video footage of the blood outside Nancy's home, and her analysis added a dimension to this picture that no one else had publicly quantified. 0 hours, 16 minutes, and 58 seconds. Santoro could see, from the photographs, that the drops on Nancy's porch are drip stains. They are the result of blood falling vertically from a source that was moving at something like a walking pace. And those small dots around the larger stains, what forensic analysts call satellite spatter, those happen when blood falls from a certain height onto a hard surface and the impact sends secondary microdroplets outward. The presence of satellite spatter allowed Santoro to make a specific measurement. The blood was falling from a height of probably more than 2 feet. 0 hours, 17 minutes, and 38 seconds. Now think about what that means physically. 2 feet, that is not close to the ground. That is not the height of blood dripping from a hand dragging low. It is not the height of blood falling from someone slumped or collapsed or pressed to the floor. 2 feet or more is approximately the height of a wound located somewhere on a standing or near-standing body. A face, a nose, a mouth, at or around head height, above 2 feet, being held at that height as whoever was carrying Nancy moved toward the driveway. Something or someone was carrying Nancy, and the wound was still at face height. She was being held up. 0 hours, 18 minutes, and 19 seconds. Santoro also made a critical observation about volume. The blood trail doesn't suggest a slow minor bleed. The concentration and distribution of the drops, in Santoro's read, indicates what she described as bleeding very quickly. Bleeding pretty badly. If Nancy had been walking freely and bleeding slowly, you would not see that distribution pattern on the porch tiles. The drops are too numerous. The coverage is too concentrated in specific locations, rather than evenly spaced along a walking stride. Something was producing a lot of blood, quickly, from a height above 2 feet, while moving at approximately a walking pace toward the driveway. 0 hours, 18 minutes, and 59 seconds. Santoro was also careful, disciplined even, about what the blood does not suggest. Looking at the photographs, she did not see the type of staining she would associate with a gunshot wound. Gunshot injuries produce specific, high-velocity spatter patterns, much smaller drops, far more of them, and typically a dramatically greater volume of blood. The staining associated with a gunshot wound to the head or face would look completely different from what is visible on Nancy's porch. What Santoro sees instead is consistent with blunt force. A strike to the face. A nosebleed induced by impact. Or, given Nancy's age, a skin tear consistent with the thin, fragile skin that is common in elderly patients, combined with a nosebleed from the force of whatever confrontation occurred. 0 hours, 19 minutes, and 49 seconds. And then Santoro noted one additional detail, quietly. Almost in passing, she did not see blood in the immediate area of the door itself. Now we have Ashley Banfield's sources telling us the blood inside was found just past the front door. And we have Santoro analyzing the outside photographs and seeing no blood directly at the threshold. What does that tell us? It tells us that by the time Nancy was at the door, crossing from inside to outside, the bleeding was either just beginning or had already been established inside and was continuing as she was carried across the threshold and onto the porch. The violence had already occurred. What the porch photographs captured was not the beginning. It was the continuation. 0 hours, 20 minutes, and 38 seconds. Part 6. The voids that weren't there. We now know the type of blood, aerated from the nose or mouth, courtesy of Dr. Baden. We know the height, above 2 feet, fast bleed, from Amy Santoro. We know the origin, inside the home first, then outside, from Ashley Banfield's sources. But there is a fourth piece of information embedded in that blood pattern, and it may be the most operationally significant detail of all. It is not about what is in the blood pattern. It is about what is missing from it. The voids, or more precisely, the complete, total absence of them. 0 hours, 21 minutes, and 20 seconds. In bloodstain pattern analysis, a void is exactly what it sounds like: an interruption. A gap, a place where a drop should have fallen and didn't because something was in the way. When a person walks through their own blood trail, when their feet land on the ground between drops, those feet interrupt the pattern. They create gaps, foot-shaped gaps, stride-shaped absences in a trail that would otherwise be continuous. If you are bleeding and walking, your feet hit the ground with every step. Every step stops some drops. Every stride leaves a gap in the trail. And if you are bleeding enough to leave a visible trail on the porch tiles, a forensic analyst can look at that trail and see exactly where your feet were, how wide your stride was, whether you were moving slowly or quickly. The footsteps are written in what's absent. 0 hours, 22 minutes, and 10 seconds. Nancy Guthrie's blood pattern on the porch had no voids. Not one. Retired FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell, appearing on Brian Antoine Investigates on March 8th, was precise about what she saw and what she didn't see in those photographs. The blood was concentrated in a pattern where you would expect to see footprint interruptions. The sphere of blood, the distribution, the radius of drops from a central point is big and round, the way it should be if blood fell freely from above with nothing interrupting it on the way down. Nothing in the way. No foot on the left. No foot on the right. No stride. No step. No gap. O'Connell drew the only logical conclusion available. Nancy was not walking. If there are no voids, nothing was interrupting the blood drops on their way down. The drops fell from the source and hit the surface, and nothing stopped them. Because Nancy's feet were not on the ground. She was being carried. 0 hours, 23 minutes, and 8 seconds. Part 7. The burrito, the doors, and the head that turned. O'Connell had already given investigators and analysts the key structural conclusion. Nancy was not walking. She was wrapped in something, being carried. But what she said next is the detail that transforms this from a forensic observation into a reconstruction. A moment-by-moment account of exactly what happened at that front door. She theorized, and this is her expert analysis, not official law enforcement findings, that Nancy was wrapped up, in O'Connell's words, a little bit like a burrito, restrained, contained, incapacitated enough that whoever was carrying her was managing her weight and her movement the way you would manage something you needed to keep still. 0 hours, 23 minutes, and 55 seconds. And then O'Connell walked through the mechanics of the door. Look at Nancy Guthrie's front entrance. There are not one but two separate barriers between the interior of the house and the open driveway. The first is the large wooden front door. Solid. Heavy. It opens inward, which means to exit, you have to back up with whatever you are carrying to create clearance. The second, on the exterior, is a wrought iron security gate. A separate door. A second obstacle. Another obstruction to navigate with your hands full and a human body across your arms or over your shoulder. 0 hours, 24 minutes, and 38 seconds. Think about the physical reality of that sequence for a moment. You are carrying a 150-pound woman. She is restrained, wrapped, incapacitated. You are trying to exit a house without being seen, without leaving evidence, without making noise. You reach the front door. You have to back up, physically shift your weight and your hold, move backward with Nancy in your arms, to pull the door open. You then have to navigate the second door. The iron gate, more adjustment, more weight redistribution, more physical problem solving, with your hands already occupied. Every single one of those transitions requires a readjustment of grip, a shift in how the weight is distributed, a moment where the carefully wrapped, carefully contained body in your arms moves, even slightly, in response to the physics of your own movement. 0 hours, 25 minutes, and 23 seconds. And during one of those readjustments, one of those grip shifts, one of those moments of repositioning, her head moved. A body wrapped tightly stays relatively contained. Blood from a nose or a mouth, pressed against fabric or against a chest, stays partially absorbed. But when a grip shifts, when the weight redistributes, a head can fall to the side. An airway can open. A face can tilt toward the floor. And when it does, the blood that has been collecting falls straight down. Not cast to the side. Not smeared across a surface. Not dragged in a streak. Straight down, in a concentrated cluster, on the porch tiles, directly below where her face was at that exact moment. That is what the photographs show. A concentrated pattern of aerated blood drops falling from above 2 feet, with no voids, at a location consistent with the double-door threshold, the precise spot where the grip would have had to change, where the weight would have shifted, where a wrapped and incapacitated head would have been most likely to turn. 0 hours, 26 minutes, and 15 seconds. O'Connell's reconstruction, in her own words. When they got to the front door, they had to back up to open that big oak door. Then they had to open the wrought iron gate. And then, as they were trying to get down and get through, maybe her head just turned. And that's when the blood happened. That is not speculation for its own sake. That is a reconstruction. And every element of it is consistent with the physical evidence as described by 4 separate experts from 3 separate analytical disciplines. Dr. Baden, the drops are aerated, from the nose or mouth. Amy Santoro, the drops fell from above 2 feet. High velocity, fast bleed. Maureen O'Connell, the drops have no voids, nothing interrupted them. Nancy's feet were not on the ground. Ashley Banfield's sources. The trail begins inside the home and crosses the threshold. One theory. 4 independent data points. All consistent. 0 hours, 27 minutes, and 10 seconds. Part 8. What the blood tells the FBI. The blood on Nancy Guthrie's front porch was not a mistake in the way most people use that word. It was not an oversight. It was not sloppiness. It was physics. When you carry a 150-pound woman, restrained, wrapped, bleeding from her face, and you navigate 2 separate doors with your hands full, the blood falls where physics says it falls. You cannot prevent it. You cannot plan around it. You cannot wrap a human body tightly enough, quickly enough, efficiently enough, to prevent blood from finding its way to the ground when a head turns. That is the mistake, not that it wasn't planned for. The perpetrator likely understood, on some level, that evidence was being left behind. But blood does not care about plans. Blood obeys physics. And physics recorded every movement made on that porch. 0 hours, 28 minutes, and 0 seconds. The shape of the drops tells investigators the source of the bleeding, nose or mouth, aerated, consistent with impact or airway compression. The height of the drops tells investigators how high off the ground Nancy was at the time of bleeding, above 2 feet, consistent with being carried at or near head height. The absence of voids tells investigators she was carried, not walked. Nothing interrupted the drops, because her feet never touched the ground. The trail from inside to outside tells investigators where the violence began, not on the porch, not in the driveway, but inside Nancy Guthrie's home before she ever reached the door. And the concentration of the drops at the doorway tells investigators exactly where the carrying became difficult, where the 2 doors were an obstacle, where the grip shifted, where the head moved, where physics captured the moment in blood on pale tiles. 0 hours, 28 minutes, and 52 seconds, 53 days in, investigators are not working from nothing. They are working from a porch full of information. A forensic record, written in 4 dimensions, shape, height, direction, and absence, by a body that had no ability to plan what it recorded and no ability to change what it left behind. The person who carried Nancy Guthrie across that threshold and down that driveway could not undo what the blood said. He could only hope no one would read it. 0 hours, 29 minutes, and 28 seconds. If you have information about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, please call the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Day 53. She was alive when she left. That means she could still be found.